One. Good morning. Anybody there? All right. So first of all, I must apologize that actually when I got invited to address the forum this morning, I did tell them that central banking is just not my background. So we decided we're going to talk about the evolution of open banking. So I apologize to those that were looking forward to somebody who's an expert in that space. But open banking I do know something about because open banking is quite similar to open relationships, okay? And anybody who does not know what that is? That means you can transfer data to a couple people at the same time, right? In my culture, we tend to call it actually polygamy. It's quite legal and it's safe it's got its own prescriptions. Not everybody can do that. So I do want to then bring it back into the topic of open banking. I think the UK guys realized that it was so much fun for the people that have open relationships that in 2016 they legislated it, you know, and as open banking for the financial services. Really, it is about sharing data with third parties for the benefit of the customer, the benefit of the bank, and also the benefit of the third parties. So as we know that there's been so much convergence in this space, where there are telecoms companies, there are retail companies that offer financial services, and they need to be able to access these data to be able to provide a holistic, actually, view of the customer. Equally, the customer, they benefit because now they have an integrated services. For example, if you're in shipping and you're going to be getting some funding to do the shipping of whatever equipment, a bank not only would provide you now with insurance, but they actually will provide you with transportation. They will provide you with clearing, all of these services. So they are integrated, and open banking actually allows that. So I'm not going to go into the detail actually of actual open banking, but let's see if we are able to move to the next slide on this thing. Yeah, there it is. So, but I don't want to get so much into the detail actually of the technicalities of open banking. But I want to talk about the evolution of the concept of open banking. This is not me. This is Mr. Dlamini's shop from where I come from. I grew up in the farm, absolute rural places. Yeah, it is probably the only shop, well, now there's a few more, but when I grew up, it was about the only shop in the radius of about 30 kilometers. So when you do go to the shop, or they send you to the shop, it was quite a nice trip. And I'll tell you about it, because so much actually happened in that shop. And I can tell you, Mr. Dlamini, his wife, and his children that we used to play with, and they're sitting on the countertop. The countertop is quite important because that's what we call today platform business. That was the platform of transaction. And I will take you through some of the services, obviously, that took place. For example, yes, you could go buy grocery, you could buy clothes, you could buy farming equipment, right? And you will get so many actually other services actually as well. So if you have a relative that is in town, in Johannesburg, you will know actually that shop is also the bus stop. So if it was opening of schools, your mother would have sent you uniform and some books from town, and that's where you receive them. And if you're not there, obviously, it will be left with Babe Dlamini. Am I right? How many of you know this experience, by the way? I feel like I've had the privilege, actually, of being in that space. So your books will be left there, right? If they send money, it will also be given to Babe Dlamini. If you want to buy anything in town, you leave the money there, and he sends it through to be able to buy whatever you actually needed. And there were also times when there was no money, which was more often. And Babe Dlamini was the guy. When you arrive, you will lay your story. Babe Dlamini will go to there. You go to the till. And because you've been chased away from school, because you haven't paid for your fees, so Babe Dlamini will provide that, right? So Babe Dlamini was the lender, the banker, the insurer. He was, sometimes the counselor, quite frankly, because sometimes you walk all the way and lay your story. All he does is listen to you, and you go back feeling much better. So that was open banking actually at the time. The intention is that you bring all the services actually together and provide it to the customer in an integrated fashion. Now, yes, it's evolving. It needs to be legislated, and I'll talk about some of the challenges, obviously, that have been faced actually over time. Now, we've moved now from Babe Dlamini to an app. We've moved where banks wants to provide integrated services within one portal, within one platform. And it is actually a concept that is evolving from where we've come from into the mobile space. But I do want to say that obviously there's a lot more complexities that we still need to actually unpack in this space. And because I got 20 minutes, I'll try to make it quick. Let's see if we can get it again. There you go. These are the challenges. By the way, this is the only slide I have. So these challenges will still remain. And I think they still need to be solved. I think first of all is the security of the data that you are transmitting, which is why wearing condom is highly recommended. Are you still with me? So in that space, it's not just the security of the data, but also the securities of the platform. I've had the experience in one of the countries that I looked after at Standard Bank, whereby if you want to transfer money into a Momo account, there's a third party in between that does the aggregation from the multiple mobile service provider, and they're able then to effect the transaction and complete it. And so many security breaches have taken place. So much data obviously has gone missing. And also, these are transactions. You know what happens with transactions. So that point about the security of data, I think it still remains in open banking. And I think it should also remain in all of our relationships. And before you go open relationship, you need to think about the part about security. And I want to talk about the social impact, actually, of that. And now, there's also the question about the ownership of the data, which is who owns that data? Is it the customer? Is it the bank? Is it the third party? Is it the origination of the transaction? Because sometimes there's multiple parties actually in between, and you always find to complete a transaction, and somebody has to ask the question, who owns the data? And then who is then liable for the protection actually of that data? And then how do we create an ecosystem that ensures that their data is always protected and the customer is always protected? And I think we should all be worried about it because if it's your data that's being transmitted, and I think it's always going to be a concern. The other concern is that as much as we are in a polygamous relationship, there's also some sort of competition. When do we collaborate? When do we compete? Right? And I think that's also a question that we all need to sort of define to say, if I am the platform, where I can expose my services to a third party, and they can also expose their services to my platform. What does it actually mean? When do we compete? And it's sort of like if, as an example, I know there's guys from Standard Bank who would actually recognize the analogy about you own the mall because you funded the developer that developed the mall. You are Standard Bank, right? You have your own branch there, but you also want to put ABSA in there. You also want to put FNB in there. You want to put a supermarket in there. And that is the open banking that we are actually talking about, to say we're trying to create a mall where everybody can trade. Sometimes you even trade with your enemies. And in that case, we need to ask ourselves, who chooses the best spot in the mall? And what does it actually mean? Because they're both your partner, but they're also your competitor. So I think it's quite important that we start balancing those. And how do we then regulate that? My last point really that I want to make is around regulations. From the FSCA or FCA in other countries, and depending on who your partners are, let's say they're from telecoms, they also have regulators. And the risk of regulation, I think you've seen it. You've seen MTN in Nigeria being fined heavy amounts. We've seen other banks being fined heavy amounts, actually, in Mozambique and various actually other countries. It's a real risk, particularly in the space that we actually operate. Now, the issue is then, who then regulates this relationship, right? Who regulates the relationship? It can't be the customer. It can't be the bank. It can't be the partner. There has to be a regulator that manages this risk, because we can all be a law actually unto ourselves, and we can all get ourselves actually into trouble. I conclude, and a point to take away, which is, one, open banking is beneficial to the banks, to the insurance companies, to the financial services, but primarily it's very beneficial to a customer. They get an integrated actually service. And as I can say, most banks are looking for non-interest revenue. It brings them new revenue, but also the third parties, then now they're able to provide a holistic actually service, which will bring them additional revenue. And I think that's actually quite important. It's actually beneficial for everybody. And that being said, it needs to be regulated. Somebody needs to regulate it. And we need to know, when do we compete? When do we collaborate? Lastly, we need to be mindful about the security of the data that we actually exchange. So it is then my recommendation that you must always wear a condom, irrespective of what relationship you are in. Thank you very much.